What up, big dogs? I'm your host, Coach Craig, and this is Athletes Unleashed. On today's episode, my guest is a former elite level athlete and soccer player. We focus on the devastating knee injury that ended her career and how she coped with the physical, mental, and emotional toll during recovery, as well as exploring new passions, her next steps in life, and rediscovering her identity after soccer. Please enjoy my conversation with Amoryn Hale. Amoryn.
Greg!
Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I really wanted to have you on because I feel like you have it's I think both a unique and also ubiquitous experience. It's something that a lot of young athletes go through, and it's an unfortunate experience, but it's something that more and more kids, especially girls, are having happen to them. And that is, you've had multiple knee surgeries, and two. And in effect, your career was ended by injury.
Yes.
Which I want to talk about the different aspects of that and the effect it had on you over time. So I want to jump right in. You're a soccer player, or were a soccer player.
And track.
And track.
Mostly soccer.
And you were a very high-level soccer player, somebody who, in my opinion, was most likely going to play in college, and you were a very skilled and fast and just a very dynamic player, someone who caught people's eye when you played, for sure.
Thank you.
And that kind of came to a screeching halt when you got injured the first time. So take me through, where were you, what happened, and how did that, not only the injury, but then the recovery process after?
Okay, so going to my first knee injury, this happened April of 2021, and it happened in a high school game. I was playing on varsity as a sophomore, and I was still playing for G, and I was so excited. It was one of my first few times actually playing on varsity. Mm-hmm. And I remember it wasn't a moment in time. This was when I tore my meniscus. So it wasn't necessarily a moment in time. I just remember kind of jogging down the field and feeling like a sharp pain in the side of my knee. And, that's different. But I continue to play through it because a lot of people tear their meniscus and they're fine. They go about it. They don't even know they tore it. Mm-hmm. But as I continue to play on it, it just got worse, and it got to the point where my knee was blowing up and I couldn't even walk after a game. So I ended up going through this whole process of going to, I think I went to SCOE the first time, and I got x-rayed, and the doctor there, in the long run, ended up screwing me over. He was like, your knee is fine, nothing's wrong with it, put some ice on it. I continued to play, it continued to get worse. My dad is the one who was my biggest advocate in this situation. He was essentially like, okay, screw that guy, we're taking you somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So I get an MRI on my knee, and then I have a full tear in my meniscus. The dude who said there was nothing wrong, shout out him. So I had the option to either repair it or for them to snip out. It was basically a torn flap that was broken. Mm-hmm. And I ended up getting that whole piece snipped off because it was a quicker recovery. So at this time, I was going to not be able to play for the rest of high school, which I was so bummed about. Even that entire class of girls that was playing on varsity, I loved them. I was so excited to play with them, and that just came to a stop for me. Mm-hmm. But a meniscus is not necessarily a career-ending injury. So I knew that with time, rehab, 6 months, and I'm back on the field. So I wasn't necessarily devastated at this one because I was only a sophomore. Mm-hmm. 6 months, I would still be able to play club, tournament season, showcases. I didn't think it was over for me at this point. So I finally get back into the swing of things, and then I have my second knee injury.
Okay. Before we jump into your second knee injury, which I think really changed everything for you.
That's the big one, yeah.
Yeah. I'm interested. So you were talking about you're in the game, you feel a sharp pain in your knee. So there wasn't like a play or anything where you were like, that's when I did it? You just think it happened over time, or?
I would imagine that it had to have been a play because I remember a little bit earlier in the game, I had one moment with a girl down there in the corner. We were battling for the ball, and I had a little bit of an odd feeling in my knee, but it wasn't the same pain that I was feeling as I was coming back on the field.
Right.
But as an athlete, you're always tweaking things and you end up walking it off and you're fine. So I thought it would be something like that, but it wasn't.
Yeah, well,
So-
I think the mindset is you play through pain that you can play through.
Exactly. And at that point, it was definitely bearable, but
Mm-hmm.
it just progressed and it continued to get worse.
How many more, do you know how many more games you played before you couldn't anymore?
To the point where I couldn't even walk on it after a game, I think we were 4 games after the initial game that it happened.
I think this is something that a lot of athletes go through is they will play and it's bad. And they're like, okay, well, I can spend the time in between games getting it to a point where I can then play again.
Yeah.
And you keep going out and you keep playing. And in a lot of cases, I mean, if it's torn, it's torn. But there are cases where you're just making it worse, trying to go back out. So once you find out it's torn and you realize, okay, this is going to be the process. You said you made the decision to have the specific surgery because of the shorter recovery time.
Yes.
Do you know the difference between the 2 recovery times?
I think it would have been a 4 or 5 month difference. One thing after the surgery that I did, they just snipped off the piece that was torn. I was able to be walking within a week of my surgery. And if I were to do the repair, they would have had sutures in my knee and I would have had to have been off it for about a month on crutches.
Gotcha.
And I was like, no, thank you.
And before we start talking about your other knee, do you, at this point now or at any point, because you chose to do the quicker recovery surgery and them just removing the piece and not doing the repair, have you had any injury, have you had any issues with your knee since then?
With this knee, I have not had any issues. It's been pretty much fully functioning. Even when I went back, I remember my first few games, I was so worried about my knee. And I
Sure.
think that also does affect how you play, because in the back of your head, every play, tackle you go into, you're just, my knee, just kind of more hesitant. And I think that also takes a toll on your confidence too, because if you're not performing at the level that you were before,
Sure.
you're not seeing the same amount of minutes on the field. You don't have that same, at least for me as a player, one thing that made me successful, why I was put on the field, is because of my reaction time, my quickness. I would 50-50s, I'm winning it, and it just wasn't like that anymore.
Yeah.
And obviously when you're not playing your fine motor skills with the ball, that goes away too. But it was more frustrating than anything.
Yeah.
Going into it.
So you talked about your mentality getting back into the game.
Yes.
And kind of, I think with a lot of players, it's confidence. You have to gain confidence in your body again, and you have to find confidence in being the player that you were. And it's difficult sometimes to do that when you know, okay, I can't re-injure myself, because if I do, I won't be able to play. You just went through this whole process of not being able to play, and it's trying to find the player that you were again and build the confidence in that player so that you can regain the skills you had and regain the style you had. I think a lot of players, when they come back from injury, they're trying to find themselves again. They're trying to find what made them special again. And in attempting to doing that, if they fail in being that player again, it can be devastating, I think, mentally and emotionally. But even before you get up to the field, before you get back out there, where's your headspace? Because obviously you're thinking, okay, I'm going to do the shorter surgery, shorter recovery time. I'm going to play again. Like the goal is to recover and to play.
Yeah.
So you get injured, you're having surgery. Where's your head at this time? Are you just like laser focused on getting back, or are you having doubts? Or I'm always interested with injured athletes, how you deal with being forced to be off the field and then the recovery process and building back to getting out there.
Coming back. Well, I had different experiences for post-surgery.
Yeah, let's talk the first one first,
yes,
then we'll
yes,
get
yes.
into the second
For
one.
the first one, I think I was more determined than anything. I was so excited to be back because that entire off time, I was on the bench watching my team practice, play games. I was going to tournaments with them, and just sitting there and seeing someone else in your spot, it's hard to watch too. And also, obviously, you root for your teammates. You
Sure.
want them to be successful, but I don't know if it's selfish, but seeing someone else succeed where you used to succeed, it does hurt a little bit. And it's not that you don't want them to do well, it's just more of a, dang, that's supposed to be me kind of feeling. So I think when I was coming back after my surgery, I was more pumped than anything. I was like, I'm going to get back out there, I'm going to work, get to where I was when I was last on the field.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you get there and it's not what you expected, I think that's when you kind of come crashing down.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the hardest parts was not being the player that I used to be. And like you were saying, confidence, that goes a long way for a lot of people. But for me personally, that made the biggest difference in my game was my confidence, because it was whether or not I felt confident enough to take a girl on 1v1, go and do a 50-50 with her, take a shot, all of the things that I used to do without even second guessing it.
Mm-hmm.
I was second guessing myself, and that was definitely changing the way I was playing and how I was feeling about myself, and obviously the way my coach treated me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not easy. I don't know how else you could really describe it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's try.
Let's try to describe it.
What? No, I mean, what are you? You know, you don't feel confident in being the player that you were. There's things. I think when you go back out there, your teammates, your coaches, and yourself too expect you to be able to just kind of pick up where you left off. I think we all know subconsciously that there is a process to coming back. Players have to find a way back to themselves. But I think there is something that we all deal with where it's just like when you see a player back on the field, you just expect them to do what they've always been able to do.
Yeah.
You see them out there and it's like, no, that's Amoryn. She's going to do what she does.
And then I don't.
Yeah, and then it's
And
like, oh, this is where she takes that player on and scores, and then it doesn't happen, or you get picked, or whatever it might be, and then their confidence in you starts to lower, your confidence in yourself starts to lower. So less, obviously, I know how you're feeling on the field, where you're like nervous about your knee, you are concerned that we're not able to do the things that we used to be able to do. How is that then affecting you off the field, at home, in your social life, at school?
Okay, I'm glad we're talking about this, because one of the biggest changes I noticed after I wasn't performing the same on the field was also my relationship with my teammates too. So I'm still very close with all of my old teammates. I love all of those girls, but it definitely was a different dynamic, and even bickering on the field with them because I'm not doing what I was able to do before would translate into off the field as well. So I go to school with a lot of my teammates, right? And if last weekend you're yelling at me on the field because I didn't pass you the ball or I kind of shanked it towards you, I'm not going to be, hey, at school. And it does affect your relationship with them off the field. And that was never a problem for me before. But as far as myself, I think it was almost depressing. And I know the word depression is thrown around kind of loosely these days. But I was definitely doubting myself in more ways than I had ever before. And it's sad because I never thought of myself as a person who didn't have confidence. And I think even when I wasn't confident in myself, I still didn't view myself that way.
Sure.
I was just sad about it.
Yeah.
And it kind of translated into everything. And I don't know, even my relationship with my dad changed. My dad is, to this day, one of my best friends. I love him so much. But I think it's hard for him to see me kind of give up in a lot of things, and whether or not, at this point, I don't think I had given up yet, but on the field, let's say there's a play where there's a ball that I should have won and I didn't, and instead of tracking her down and going in for it again, I was just kind of like, oh, well, I guess that's the kind of player I am now. I don't win. And I think I kind of took that attitude off the field as well.
Interesting.
And that's obviously not a good thing,
No. But I think that's the effect that an injury can have on you.
It does. It kind of, in terms of your mental space, it carries over into everything. So it's, even as a practice player, I was always, I would focus in practice, but I was one of the players who was always kind of making jokes, keeping it lighthearted when our coach would have us be doing 300s, No one wants to be there, everyone wants to die. Even that was different because I felt like if I was performing and I was being successful, I was showing out for my team, then I could do that kind of thing. But when you're sucking, when you're playing, it's not funny anymore when you're the player who's making jokes at practice. Right. And I think it just kind of changed a lot of things about me in terms of how I interacted with my teammates, classmates, other people, my coach, friends. It just changes a lot for you.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you said that. I think one of the things that gets lost sometimes when players get injured is that there's much more than a physical impact.
Absolutely.
You start to lose yourself a little bit.
The physical impact is probably the least worst of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think physically you can come back. Like for a lot of people, it's like, okay, physically there's a plan. Yeah. You get surgery, you do rehab, you do physical therapy, you start practicing, you do non-contact practice, then you start going again, and eventually there's a timeline. Mm-hmm. There's a timeline that you get to come back to being who you were. But the problem is that timeline doesn't really exist for your mental space, for your emotional, for your relationship space. Like, I didn't really even think about how it might change your relationship with your teammates on such a deep level. I know you, I know your teammates, I know how close you all are. And for me to hear that, it really changed the way we interacted with each other. And it's not even something that they mean to be doing, or that it's the nature of what the situation is now.
Exactly. It's not something that I would hold against them either. But definitely I think the mental state is the biggest part. And like you said with the timeline, when you're going through your recovery process, you kind of have this mental timeline. Like, all right, at 6 months, I'm back on the field. Mm-hmm. 7 months, I want to be back in shape. 8 months, I want my skills to be back my footwork. Myself, And then when you're not matching the timeline that you had for yourself, it gets frustrating and you get worried. And you start to second guess, well, am I ever going to play the way I did before? Am I going to have the same amount of playing time I did before? Because also when you're gone, someone takes your spot.
Sure.
And when going from a starting player to someone who's only going in for the last few minutes of the half, it's hard too.
Sure.
And sometimes not even going in at all. But not being on track with that timeline that you had set for yourself, that messes with you.
And I think sometimes those timelines are unrealistic. We're setting, especially as young people, we're like, I'm going to get back so fast. I'm going to be ready to go. And then you get there and you don't feel like yourself. Mm-hmm. You're not playing like yourself.
Nope.
And then that starts to affect you. I think that is the underrated aspect of coming back from injury. And it's something I've talked to a lot of athletic trainers about. I've talked to, all sorts of people who deal with injured athletes. The mental aspect is what takes the longest to come back, because physically you might be prepared, physically your body might be healed, but
you're not mentally caught up.
Yeah, and I think it's really difficult as a player to go back out to do the same things you did before. I mean, I'm a goalkeeper, man. You go out and you take a shot to the face, you might second guess stepping up and doing the same thing. You have to. It's part of what we do. So as an injured athlete, you have to go back out and challenge for that 50-50 ball. And I think sometimes that's the best thing you can do, is put yourself in those situations and make the decision to do what you used to do. But it's very difficult when in the back of your mind you're thinking like, I cannot get injured right now.
Even when you know what you're supposed to do and you're like, I'm supposed to do this, but then you kind of half-ass it a little bit.
There's hesitancy.
The hesitation definitely, it shows, when you're not all in, it does show.
Well, and I think in comparison to who you used to be too, like people know, it's like, ooh, man, Amoryn, pre-injury Amoryn is all over. I hear it on the bench all the time, not with you specifically, but just with other players. It's like, they're just not the same. The burst isn't there.
Hearing that on PTSD.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
But I do think, my hope is that other people hear your experience and can relate to it and hopefully learn from some of the things that you've done and going through it. So I want to move to your second knee injury that really changed things. But before we get there, I want to know, like, as you're in the recovery phase, as you're getting back onto the field, is there a moment where you feel like, I'm back? Is there a moment where, or is there a process where you're like, okay, I'm finally starting to feel good in all these different areas? Or were you just forever kind of changed from it? Because I feel like for young people to know, understand, like, once this happens to you, it's going to be different forever. To be able to understand that and process that and then move forward with that information, I think it might be a little bit easier to manage the process than to assume everything is going to be like it was and I'm going to get back to who I was. And it's like, even if you get there like 99%, there's still going to be a little bit that's different because something major happened to you.
Yeah. I definitely don't think I was ever at a point that I was like, oh my gosh, I am back to the player who I was before.
Mm-hmm.
But I did definitely feel like there was a point where I was definitely getting closer to it.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately for me and other people, I had a second injury that kind of cut that off. And what sucks about my ACL that I did a little bit more than a year after the other one,
Mm-hmm.
I tore my ACL in July 2022.
And it's your other knee.
And it's the other knee. And what really sucked about that, so I tore it right before high school season, right before going into my senior year. And I was fired up because I'm coming out of tournament season, I'm doing all these showcases, and I'm finally getting minutes on the field. I'm finally having glimpses of the player that I felt like I used to be.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just performing at a point that I'm happy with, and
Sure.
I feel like I'm finally starting to get back to where I was. And tearing my ACL, I also tore pretty much all the accessory ligaments in that knee. I blew the whole thing out.
Mm-hmm.
That happened July 11th. And this was, right before high school camp. And that was, when I tore my ACL, I knew right away. It was a pop, a snap. I could hear it, I could feel it.
How did it happen?
So I was down in a tournament in San Diego,
Mm-hmm.
and I was in a game, I was playing, I was having a great game. And that's kind of sad, because to think about it, that's the last time I've ever really played.
Mm-hmm.
I've never really thought about that before. I was having a great game, I was playing the whole game at this point, and there was about half of the second half left.
Mm-hmm.
And I am chasing this girl down, and at this point I finally have my speed back, I'm confident, and this girl's ahead of me, but I'm tracking her down from the line. And I know that I can't get this ball away from this girl, so I was like, I'm just going to throw myself in front of her and take her out, take the PK, or not the PK, a free kick, but it was from like half line, so it was worth it to me. So I throw myself in front of her, I put my leg in front of her as she's running. I plant with my left foot, and this is a big-bodied girl, right?
Mm-hmm.
I am much lighter than her, shorter than her, and I'm not even a short girl.
Yeah.
I'm planted, she runs through my body, and my cleats stay planted in the grass, but the rest of my body kind of does a 360. So my knee just, it was just like pop, like gunshots, pop, pop, pop,
And you
just
knew it.
all
You
the
knew
different
it right
ligaments.
away.
Instantaneously, I go down, I just knew, and I didn't even initially cry at first. I was just in shock, like, that did not just happen, you're fine, get up.
Yeah.
I go to stand up after the play, and I just collapse, because I do not have a single thing holding my knee together.
Yeah.
So I just drop to the ground, and at that point, I think it set in that you're done. You're not going to play again. And that's when I started crying. And at that point, I did start to feel it more with the adrenaline. It didn't hurt as bad.
Yeah.
But after falling down, and I'm just kind of laying there on the grass, and I just start crying. And I think it was just more being emotionally distressed than being in pain. Not to say that it didn't hurt, but...
Yeah. At that point, the emotions are overwhelming the pain.
Yes, and I've even talked to my dad about this too. He was sitting right in front of me when it happened. He's just like laying on the grass there on the sideline.
Mm-hmm.
And he said he knew right away too. And, injuries obviously take an effect on you, the person who it happens to,
Sure.
but you don't really think about how it affects the people who care about you too. And I think I was heartbroken because I felt like I had worked so hard to get back to a point where I feel like I'm finally performing again, and I finally have hope. I'm playing in front of college coaches again, and you think it's going good until it's not.
Right.
And that was the last game that I played, tearing my ACL.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Damn.
Damn. I've never talked about this before, so it's therapeutic.
I appreciate you sharing it with us, and
Yeah.
I think, unfortunately, I think it is a feeling that a lot of other athletes can
Relate
sympathize
to.
with. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of times where something bad has happened and you don't want to believe it.
You're in denial.
We're convinced, like, get up. And that's, what's funny is, it's not funny, but we've been
Ironic.
conditioned as athletes, just get up and keep going.
Yeah.
You turn your ankle, you feel something weird, just get up, walk it off, run it off, just keep going. And it's not surprising to me that the first, you're like, nope, I'm fine, I'm going to keep going. You get up and go, and then you realize, like, no.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I wanted to ask you is if you knew in the moment, not only, like, obviously you knew something was majorly wrong, like you heard it, you felt it, but the wave of knowing that's the end.
Basically right away.
Yeah.
So as soon as I feel it, hear it, I go down, I know, in the back of my head, I know that my knee is done for and that I'm not going to be playing. Not necessarily that I would be done forever.
Yeah.
But after it happened, I knew, okay, you're not playing the rest of this game. But me being in denial, I'm like, no, you're fine. Get up. I get up, and as soon as I went down after I tried to stand up, that's when the wave of emotion hit me that your soccer career is over.
Yeah.
Because it was just a different kind of pain, a different feeling, a different sound than even my other one that took 6 months to recover physically. But with the ACL, I 100% knew right away. And then even being carried off the field, I think it was my dad and I think one of the other dads on the team helped carry me off the field, and I could not walk. And every time I tried to take a step, my entire knee would just shift over, because there was literally nothing in my knee keeping it together.
Right.
Everything had torn and full tear. So, and I'm laying down on the field and my knee is about the size of a watermelon at this point, a grapefruit. That's more realistic. And, the med cart people come over, they're putting ice on my knee, I'm drinking water. And I think that first hour after I tore it, is when I was in the most pain. Just the feeling of it swelling, everything was throbbing, like shooting pain down my leg. But more so than the pain, I was just, I think, shocked and sad. I was just so sad.
Yeah.
Because I knew that was it for me. Because there was no way I was going to come back from something this big after I had worked so hard and went through so much for something as small as a meniscus.
Yeah. So like, okay, I went through everything. My knee is done. Is it just like mentally at that point, you don't think you even want to go through it, or I mean, it's in the moment, like it's going to be difficult to deal with anyway.
Yeah. I think within the few months after I tore it, I got my surgery pretty fast. There was definitely debate. Like I had multiple long conversations with my dad about going back. He's like, you can still play, you'll miss your senior year, but you can come back around the summertime, showing me all these inspirational stories of someone who tore their ACL and came back 5 months later, 6 months later. I don't know how they do that because that just was not me. It took me the full year.
Yeah.
And I think there was definitely conversation about me going back to soccer. But after I went through my knee surgery, that was horrible. And just being bedridden for 3 weeks, having to call both of your parents over to lift up your leg, have to be so careful to not move it in the slightest bit and put you down just so you can go pee. I lived in my bed for about a month, and it's just, I mean, I'm sure there's more depressing things, but from what I've experienced, that was just one of the most depressing things. And when you're laying in bed for a month, you have a lot of time to think, right? And I'm just laying in bed, just thinking, kind of doped up because of whatever they're giving me for my knee. Just feeling kind of this overwhelming feeling of defeat and replaying the chain of events, thinking, could I have done anything differently? Am I going to be able to come back to soccer? Is it over for me? Just kind of a lot of internal conflict, not knowing what you want to do. And that's really hard too, because my entire life I have identified as a soccer player from the time I was 4 years old.
Right.
And now you're in a position where you don't know if you're ever going to be able to play again. So
that's something we talk about a lot. Actually, it's come up on other episodes, is what happens when something that you've identified yourself as for your entire life comes to an end. And some people get to dictate when that ends, and some people have it ended for them. And I think that is a really difficult thing to deal with, because there's a bit of an identity crisis of who am I? Like, as athletes, we spend so much time dedicating ourselves to this thing that we love to do. And at some point, I think love for the game shifts to like a need to be great at it, a desire to be great.
I agree.
And that process, dedicating yourself to the process and pretty much allowing it to overwhelm your life, you effectively become an athlete over everything. And I try to encourage young people to remember, like, hey, you're a student, you're a person, you're a human.
There's more to you than whatever sport
Absolutely.
you play.
But it's difficult when you're a young person where all you think about all the time is being a soccer player and being an athlete. This is who I am. And then for some people, they get to slowly evolve out of that, and they get to realize I'm other things, I want to be other things. And other people, it is ripped away.
It is abruptly ended overnight.
And so as somebody who had it ripped away from them, do you still consider yourself an athlete? Like, how did you go through that process of re-identifying yourself? Are you still going through the process? And where do you see yourself moving forward?
So when I realized that I was not going to be playing soccer again, it was just more of a gut feeling. I don't know if that makes sense.
Sure. I think a lot of athletes can attest to a gut feeling.
So I think it was definitely more of a gut feeling that, or even if I were to get back into the swing of things and try to get back on the field, I would not be playing at the level that I wanted to play.
Sure.
So throughout my whole life, I had always thought that I was going to be playing D1 soccer. I always envisioned myself being a high-level athlete. It's what I wanted to do, the only thing I could see myself doing.
Sure.
I didn't identify with anything else. And I think that's kind of dangerous if the one thing you identify with is ripped away from you. So realizing that that was not in my cards anymore definitely kind of freaked me out. And I definitely went through an identity crisis, because when you identify something your whole life and all of a sudden you're just not that anymore, I didn't know what to do with myself. Practicing, when you put in hours every day, multiple weeks out of the year, if not every week of the year, for almost your entire life, and you're not doing that anymore, you just kind of don't know what to do with yourself.
Right.
And I just kind of found myself in this gray area of nothingness. I don't know how else to explain it, but not knowing, when all of your friends, even little things like having a conversation with, most of my friend group was made up of my teammates.
Sure.
And not being able to participate or relate to the things that they can talk to, or like talk to each other about. A story from practice that I didn't experience, or a play that happened in a game that I wasn't a part of, or a tournament that they're preparing for, or something as little as new jerseys they're getting, It's just those little things that you don't relate to anymore, and you're just kind of like, now what?
Yeah, you're missing out.
Exactly, you're definitely missing out. And at this point, I think I was really not only going through an identity crisis, but it sent me into a depression. And the person who's depressed, it doesn't only affect them, but it definitely affects the people who love them. I know my dad, it was hard for him to see me go through that because I'm not doing what I love anymore, what I've given my life to, and just kind of wasting away almost. And I wasn't really focused on anything else either. It's not like, oh my gosh, I don't have practice, so I'm going to go put in those 2 hours I would have been at the field studying. I was just laying there kind of doing nothing. And I think a good way to describe it is feeling kind of worthless. Like you're not doing anything that's contributing to anything, that's contributing to yourself.
Yeah.
And obviously that's an intrinsic thing, you know, you have to find motivation for yourself to do things, but it's hard to find that motivation when you don't feel like there's anything for you.
Right.
Yeah.
We talked about how it affected your family and the people around you that love you. Did you notice, have they ever said anything to you? Did you notice something specific? I know especially your relationship with your dad is super close, and when it comes to soccer especially.
Yeah.
And obviously, I think seeing your child not be able to do what they love to do, and I think too, what you love to watch them do. I think your dad probably loved to watch you play.
He did, yeah.
And you talked about the effect that it had on. Has he ever told you the kind of effect that it had on him? Have you had any of those conversations?
We've had conversations about it. He just, nothing really more than him expressing to me that it breaks his heart to see me go through what I'm going through and feel the way I feel, especially when he more so than anyone knows what I went through with my first injury and how hard I worked to get back, and then to see that taken away again. And he was always my biggest supporter for my ventures on and off the field, and he knew what my plans and my goals were, and then when he kind of realized that I realized that that wasn't going to happen for me, I think that was hard for him to see.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
So you've gone through all that. It's been, would you say, July of 2022?
I just hit my 1-year anniversary.
Wow.
For my knee surgery, 2 weeks ago?
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So you've had a little bit of time to process.
Yes.
You've moved forward in your life. You're going to college. You're going to Arizona State. It's very exciting. I had just a couple things that I'm thinking about for your future. Do you have you been able to kind of channel some of the energy that you had for being an athlete and for playing soccer into other avenues of your life? Do you have things that you're excited about? Obviously, school is very exciting, but like things that you want to study or want to experience or want to do that's kind of carrying you forward, where there might be a void where soccer used to fill?
Yeah.
Or do you have those things moving forward now? Have you found a bit of a transition in your life?
I think it wasn't until recently that I kind of stopped identifying myself as a soccer player. And, you know, when one door closes, another one opens, and then you kind of don't realize that it was an opportunity until later, and I think that's a hard thing to stomach too, even though if I could undo it, I would not have torn my ACL. But at the same time, I would not be where I am or doing what I'm doing if that never happened.
Sure.
So, you know, a few months after not being able to play and I can walk now, I didn't know what to do with myself, so I got a job. I got my first job. I was working at a restaurant. I love that restaurant. I love the people who work there. I love the chef, and I met people who I would have never met doing that.
Absolutely.
So that was a great experience for me. I also started modeling too, and that would have never happened for me if I continued to play soccer. So it has pros and cons, definitely. Sure. I'm grateful for where I am now, you know, putting all of that aside. I think you do come out a stronger person and with this sense of determination to kind of make something of yourself, because when you know that your original plan's not going to work out, you're kind of scrambling to put something else together. So now I have other things going for me, because when there's a period of time where I didn't have a job, I wasn't modeling, I wasn't going to ASU, I kind of felt like I had nothing going for me.
Right.
And, you know, it takes a toll on your confidence too. But once you realize that there is more to life than your sport that you played from the time you were 4 years old to 17, I think you start to feel more comfortable with yourself and more excited about life, if that makes sense to you.
It does.
Because for a while, I was kind of feeling like, okay, what is there to do for me?
Mm-hmm.
You know, because you have this plan in your head for your whole life, and it doesn't work out for you. But when you realize that you're doing things that you wouldn't have been able to do if you were still playing your sport or doing whatever that you enjoy doing, you feel more of an appreciation for what you went through and where you are now.
That's great. I'm glad that you've come out stronger on the other side.
Yeah.
I'm happy for you.
Thank you.
I know it was not easy.
Not easy, no.
I do think that for every athlete, your career ends at some point, and preferably on your own terms. Some of us are not as lucky. But I do think a lot of the things you learn as an athlete help us progress forward. So I'm sure there are things that you found out about yourself when you were out there grinding and struggling that you can now apply moving forward. And I'm glad that you found some purpose in your life that go beyond the soccer field.
Yeah.
Because I know I think for a long time there wasn't any purpose.
There was no purpose, yeah.
So I'm excited for you and where your future goes. Do you have, now that future plans don't involve soccer, do you have big plans for the future? Do you have things that you're ambitious about doing? And do you ever plan to play again in any capacity?
Oh, that's a good question. I haven't actually expressed this to anyone, but I've been thinking about maybe doing club at ASU because I know that's an option. And a lot of the times people on the club team are girls who started out playing soccer there and decided college soccer is not for me or college sports aren't for me, but they want to keep doing what they love, so they go down to club. I've kind of considered that, and I don't know yet. I think it definitely depends on how I feel when I'm there. But I think part of me is kind of scared to kind of venture into soccer again because I'm at a point now where I'm finally comfortable with not being a soccer player. And then I have this hesitation or this fear of kind of throwing myself back into that, putting my identity back into that, and then me somehow losing that again.
Right. Well, and you've started to build a new identity for yourself.
I've started to build a new identity, and I'm liking it. I'm enjoying it. I think I'm going to go with it. But I don't know if I would ever go back to soccer. Some of my old teammates play, Nat, Ella, they all play indoor. And I go and I watch their games sometimes, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, that looks fun.
Yeah.
That used to be me out there. Or you have moments where you get saddened by it and you do miss it, but you have to realize that where you are now would not have happened if you weren't there.
Well, I've talked to other people too, and they've talked about finding a love for it again in a less competitive environment. Where they're able to compete, but it's not as serious as before, and they're just enjoying. They're just playing. Yeah. But I understand your hesitation. Like, you've evolved, you've reached a new level in your life, and you want to kind of see where that goes. So that was the second part of my question. Do you have ambitions beyond
soccer?
Well, I mean, obviously beyond soccer, but like, where do you have things for your life where you see it going in the future? Like,
I'm not completely sure what I want to do with the rest of my life. I think that's
okay for somebody who's your age.
Yeah, as an 18-year-old, I think I have time to get it together. But I am going to ASU. I'm not staying at their main campus. I'm at the Polytechnic campus, which is where all their STEM majors stay.
Very cool.
And I will be studying science, technology, and society.
That's very exciting.
Which is definitely not a major I think I would have taken on if I were still playing soccer. I think I probably would have done business, communications. Not that there's anything wrong with those majors.
This one's just a little bit more intense.
This one's it's more intense and something that I'm excited about, and I do want to put my time and energy towards that. And I don't know what I want to do, but I'm studying something that I'm interested in. Science is definitely something that I've really enjoyed all of high school and done well at. And I don't know. I don't have any crazy plans, but I'm happy with where I am now as long as I'm continuing to progress. I just don't want to stay stagnant. So as long as I'm progressing in the areas that I have going for me, then I'm a happy camper.
That's great. So. I think you're on a really positive path, and I think at some point, if you don't know where you want to go, walking the path and seeing where it leads you, and being open to where it leads you, I think is a really cool thing. So that's very exciting. I'm glad you're doing what you like to do.
Yes.
And you're gonna study something that's interesting. That sounds interesting to me. I can't wait to see where you go.
I'll send you my lecture notes, Craig.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I will review them in detail. Well, it makes me happy to hear that you've gotten. I was there pretty much. I wasn't there for your injury. I remember when I got a phone call about it, and I was pretty devastated to hear it because I knew you were coming back, and I was excited for you to play. And I think some people don't regard high school season as important as club, especially for getting recruited, and for some people it is. But I think, especially the group of people that you were with for high school, really close-knit, like all your best friends. I wanted that for you.
It was a big year, and I wanted to be there.
And you were still a part of the team and part of the experience. And I just know it's difficult when you don't get to be the part that you want to be. But I'm very happy that you've come out on the other side with a positive mindset. And I wanted to talk to you about this because I wanted other kids who I'm sure are going through the similar thing. ACL is a huge issue for young women athletes.
Yes.
And so I wanted people to hear your story and understand that there is life after an injury. There is life
after death.
Yeah. And you're going to feel, you might feel really bad for a while. And some people might make the decision, I'm going to come back. I don't care how badly injured I was. My goal is to be this thing, and I'm going to do it.
I applaud people who come back because that is hard.
Respect, but I also wanted people to see that losing out on something that you love is not the end of your life, and you can find, it might take a little bit of time, and it's going to take some work emotionally, and it's going to take some work mentally, and obviously work physically, but there are avenues for you to kind of rediscover yourself and find new pathways and new things that excite you the way that your sport used to. So I appreciate you coming on and telling a very vulnerable and difficult story that we talked about before that you never really told before.
It felt good to talk about it.
I'm glad to hear it.
Thank you for having me, Craig.
It's been my pleasure. I really hope that other people who listen to this who are going through something similar can take notes from your experience and maybe draw from it. Who never know? Maybe somebody will reach out to you with a question. But
DM me.
I always like to end the show the same way, and it's asking a simple question. Is that if you have anybody out there who's going through a similar situation that you are, or has similar goals or whatever in your specific situation, I know there are people out there who are going to listen to this who are going through something or have been through something like this. What's one piece of advice that you'd give them to help them kind of along their way?
Okay. I think the one piece of advice I would give to someone who is currently struggling with an injury or is in the process of overcoming it, it is going to be okay. You are not alone. You're not the only person who has gone through this. Even though you don't feel like anyone else who's currently in your life can relate to you, there are people who can relate to you. And stay strong. Don't give up. You will find something else that you're passionate about. Your life is not over. Things will move on and other doors will open for you. Mm-hmm. And you may not realize it now, but at some point in the future, you're going to realize that it was maybe a blessing. I'm a firm believer in everything happens for a reason. So there's other things for you to explore, and there's other plans for you in life. And just wait. Just keep going.
I love it. I appreciate you saying all those things. I appreciate you telling your story. I think there's a lot of value in understanding that there's more to life than just being an athlete.
There is more to life than being an athlete.
And for some of us,
it takes a while to realize it.
Yeah, for some of us, it is who we are. It's what we'll always do. I know in my life, I've dedicated my life to other athletes, and it's important for me to help them along their journeys, but it's also part of my responsibility to let them know that it's not everything, and there is more to life. And you're right, sometimes something tough is going to happen, and it's going to send you down a path you didn't think that you would be on, and you end up in a better place than you ever could have been. And I hope that people find your story inspiring, and I do love the telling people they're not alone, because I feel like
you feel alone when you're going through it, but you're not.
A lot of things as an athlete you feel alone, whether it be not playing or struggling with an injury or just the general difficulties in managing your schedule. It's despite a lot of athletes playing on teams, it's often a lonely experience. Even though you know your friends are there, you have people to rely on. As athletes, we tend to keep things inside. And it's difficult sometimes for us to express ourselves. And another reason why I wanted to do this show is because it gives athletes like yourself an opportunity to speak their story and say things that you've never said before and let other people know it's going to be okay. It doesn't feel like it right now, but just keep going.
Just keep going.
I love it. Thank you so much, dude. I
Thank you,
appreciate
Craig.
this. You're
I'm
awesome.
so happy. Thank you for having me.
Killed it. Big thank you once again to our guest this week, Amoryn Hale, our amazing producer, Malin Blade, and everybody who tuned in. Be sure to check out our next episode for more Athletes Unleashed. Later, homies.